The LA Clippers were always going to have an uphill battle this season with Kawhi Leonard out of the lineup. But now with Paul George possibly out for the season as well, and the Clippers sitting in the 8th seed, they risk a year without a playoff berth during the Kawhi and Paul George era, and some roster changes could be coming moving forward. Ultimately, the Clippers were starting off handicapped this year. As mentioned, Kawhi Leonard was going to be out for most of, if not all of the season, and when you don't have your MVP, you're going to struggle. Now, there was still hopes that the Clippers would get into a playoff spot, potentially even avoid the play-in games and get into the top 6, with Paul George leading the way, and it looked like that was going to be possible early on with Paul George playing at an MVP-type level. He was very elite to start the season, but that did tail off. Injuries caught up to him as he now has picked up an elbow injury, which may keep him out for this season, and ultimately now they are without Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Now, both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard have 2 years left of team control, but that means there's only 2 years left guaranteed of the Kawhi Leonard, Paul George era. That's it. We only have 2 more years left now that are guaranteed. They both have player options in those third years. But we're now 3 years into this. No finals appearances, no titles, and only 2 years guaranteed remaining. At this current moment, it doesn't look like a playoff appearance is likely. And even if it is and they get into the playing games, they're not going to be doing anything special with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George either not healthy or coming back not soon before back from injury. I wouldn't count on them too much at that point in time. They currently are 21-22. They currently are in the 8th seed. They are 7-10 without Paul George. Really struggle on the offensive end without him. And as mentioned, at best, they're currently a playing team with no upside to really do anything more than just get swept in the playoffs unless Kawhi and Paul George are really back ready to roar by the time the playoffs came, which I'm not necessarily counting on. And so, with that being in mind, there's 2 years left on Kawhi deal and the George deal. It's been fine. This era's been fine, sure, but there was big expectations when these guys were brought into LA. The Kawhi signing and the Paul George trade, which was what made Kawhi sign, because otherwise Kawhi would have likely went back to Toronto. It was whoever was going to make the trade, essentially, bring in Paul George. And ultimately now they're in a scenario where their conference finals appearance, sure, furthest they've made in the Clippers organization, but it's not exactly the high hopes that they had and the media had and the NBA world had for this group when Paul George and Kawhi entered were added to the team. There's not a ton of moves that can even be made with this group just because of how this team is built. They don't really have a ton of first-round picks to move. They sent them all away in the Paul George trade. They don't really have a ton of young assets they can look to move. And they don't really have many salaries or contracts they can match money with either that makes sense. Eric Bledsoe is a piece you could see moved. He only has 1 year left after this season. Only $3.9 million of that is guaranteed, so it's possible he just gets waived and ends up being a free agent. But it's also possible that he gets moved with only 1 year left. Someone might be a little bit more willing to take on that contract. He's been fine this year, but he still struggles on offense. He's not a player who lives up to his contract, end of the day. But he could end up being moved for some assets. Ibaka and Hartenstein are expiring contracts this year as well, heading in 2022 free agency, and neither would demand a ton of value right now, especially Hartenstein and even still Ibaka, but potentially they could be moved if the Clippers don't want to retain them next season. But ultimately, there isn't really much else you can do from a salary standpoint in terms of matching salaries for any notable trade. They have Luke Kennard, who they could look to move, but has been fine for them this year, and Reggie Jackson, I don't think they'd be looking to move because they need him at the point guard spot. Ultimately, there isn't that many options for this Clippers team. They kind of are what they are right now, other than some small free agent pickups on vet minimums and mid-level exception. But that's about it. That's really about it. So you've got a group now that lost 4-3 to Denver after being up 3-1 in the second round of the bubble. Lost 4-2 in the conference finals to the Suns last year, but ultimately that was without Kawhi. And now we're currently the 8th seed, looking like they're likely not going to make playoffs. That's currently what the Clippers era has been with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. There's still at least 2 years left. But the Clippers, along with Kawhi and Paul George, would still like to end this era with a title, or at the very least a finals appearance. Something that as of right now is increasingly in doubt. That is my thoughts on the Clippers currently for the remainder of the season and moving forward in this era with only 2 years left on this star duo. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Like and subscribe down below if you guys did enjoy the video and want more NBA content like this. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.